Let's start the tech news with RDNA 3. A lot of people are very excited to see what we see on November 3rd when AMD unveils their new GPUs. And well, the leaks and rumors start to pour in the closer and closer we get to launch. Now, it's looking like we're going to see some interesting branding. For a long time, we've seen AMD's GPUs end with XT on the more advanced version of a card. Sometimes you'll have, like a 6800 and a 6800 XT. And while sometimes the actual chips themselves, like parts of the GPU, have included an XTX or an XTXH naming scheme, the actual product branding has not. But the latest rumors on this, and we also have some specs on it here, seem to be coming from Bench Life, which is not in English, but I'm seeing it reported on here by videocards.com. And they are saying that they can corroborate that this name is indeed used by AMD for the Radeon model. In other words, we will be seeing an RX 7900 XTX. Now, Video Cards is saying that they have used the XTX branding going all the way back to the X1000 series with an X1900 XTX. And again, the GPUs themselves get these names in them, but not the product branding, if that makes any sense at all. But anyway, as far as the actual specs go, it looks like we're now expecting to have a 7900 XTX as well as a 7900 XT. We've seen the XT already rumored as 20 gigabytes of GDDR6 memory. And now these rumors are pointing to the XTX model being that version with 24 gigabytes of memory that we had seen talked about in the past. Now, some rumors had been wondering if this would be called a 7950 XT, but by not using that, that means that is still available. And Video Cards here is claiming that, maybe we could see a 3D V-Cache version of the Nave 3 GPUs, something like that, where we maybe see those 50 brandings. And so if I shrink myself out of the way here, according to Video Cards, likes to track all the latest rumors, this now puts our top-end chips as the 7900 XT and the 7900 XTX. And these are rumored numbers of stream processors, not official again, and again rumored at 20 gigabytes versus 24, at 20 gigabit per second speeds on the memory, and again rumored power consumption targets here. Notice both of those are less than the 4090s. So if the rumors of AMD's chips here being able to double previous gen performance, we should see a very interesting competition, but the real question, I think, would again be the pricing. I think if they're closer to 1,000 on these top-end chips versus 1,600, I think these become pretty interesting. Again, I said in a recent video that I'm kind of predicting $1,200-ish makes sense because that's more expensive than their 6950 XT launched at, which was at $1,100, but not by a huge amount. And it also puts them as a price competitor with a 4080 16 gigabyte, because the 12 gigabyte got canceled. Anyway, I don't know. We'll see what happens, because again, my biggest question is, performance to dollar ratio rather than just who has the performance crown. Now, let's, this is another article on the same thing. There's the Bench Life article. Let's just move on here, because I want to talk about Nvidia downgrading the RTX 3060. Well, they're not making your 3060 if you already have one worse, but they are now going to be selling an 8 gigabyte version. Now, at first, I actually, if it was just cutting the 12 gigabytes down to 8 gigabytes, I would personally think, great, they can save money, and honestly, the RTX 3060 doesn't really need 12 gigabytes. The problem is that when you cut down to 8 gigabytes, that means you're affecting the memory bus. Now, a lot of people don't understand this, and this is what a lot of people, when they're questioning, why did Nvidia have a 3060 with 12 gigabytes, but the 3060 Ti has 8 gigabytes, and their 3080 has 10 gigabytes? Well, guys, that's because of memory bus design. So my understanding of this, again, I do not design these things, is that you need 16 bits to put on a chip of memory. So basically, you have to divide by 16 on your memory bit, divide it by 16, and that's how many sticks of memory you can put. So if you divide 128 by 16, you get 8. So they could fit 8 here. The older version of the 3060 has a 192-bit bus, and 192-bit, divided by 16 gives you the 12, the 12 number. Now, again, where you see like 12 and you see 24, 8 and you see 16, 10 and 20, that kind of a thing, is because, okay, well, you divide by 16 to see how many of those chips you can fit, but do you put a 1 gigabyte chip of memory there, or do you put a 2 gigabyte chip of memory there? So you can cut it in half and double it without affecting the memory bit bus, but you can't just like add 1 and make this 9, if that makes any sense. So the point is, I'm fine with seeing it cut down to 8 gigabytes if that didn't also make it slower. So we'll see what sort of impact this has on the performance. Just be very careful if you see the Manly. Anyway, the Manly brand of RTX 3060 8 gigabyte is now being reported on here. So be careful if you buy a 3060. If it's the 8 gigabyte version, it's not just less VRAM, it is less memory bus, and so we'll have to see what that actually means for the performance. But that is going to reduce the memory bandwidth from 360 gigabytes per second to 240 gigabytes per second. Like, that is a significant reduction to memory bandwidth. So we'll see how widespread these are. Now, what I think is happening here is that Nvidia is not going to be replacing their 12 gigabyte RTX 3060. I think this is being introduced as a lower tier option to be a lower priced competitor against GPUs like AMD's RX 6600, 6600 XT, 6650 XT. Their prices have been crashing well below the price of a 3060. Making them pretty attractive options. And then we've also seen Intel, launching their Arc GPUs at a pretty aggressive pricing versus the 3060. So I think this is NVIDIA's attempt to maintain higher pricing on the 12 gigabyte model, but also compete on price a bit. But we'll have to see where this goes. Now, in a similar sort of story, we're also seeing NVIDIA's RTX 3070 Ti show up with a GA102 GPU inside, instead of was it GA104 that they used to use? Or was it 103? I think, anyway, the point is, I'll dig into it here in the article. Yeah, it used to be the GA104. That's what I thought. So the point is, basically, if you don't understand what the GA102 means, the 3070 Ti used to basically use the same GPU, actual GPU inside of it, the piece of computer chip inside of it used to be the same as a 3070, but it was overclocked, right? And pushed harder, a little bit bigger, right? That kind of a thing. Whereas if you move up to GA102, you are on an entirely different GPU chip inside of it. You now are using the GPU chip that is inside of like an RTX 3080 or a 3090. However, it's going to be significantly cut down, so it's looking like it should basically be, cut down to offer similar levels of performance, because it is cut down to 6,144 stream processors here. Also, as a side effect of moving to the GA102 chip, it's looking like the power consumption, out of the way here, is popping up to 320 watts. Because my understanding is, if you're on this other chip, the bigger GA102 chip, and even if you disable some of those cores, I think they still they still exist and are using some amount of power on the GPU as you run power through it. So that's going to be a pretty heavy power consumption. Although honestly, 3070 Ti's already were not particularly, power power efficient, I guess is maybe the word I'm looking at here. Now, this seems to be a Zotac card. That is, we're at least first seeing this show up with. Now, one thing to mention though is that, and I think this article mentions this too. Yeah, this is what I thought. Usually when NVIDIA launches mixed GPU variants, they are typically only available in China, so this card should be no exception. In other words, you might not ever actually see this available yourself. This could just be a China-only thing, Whereas I don't think that's the case on like our 3868 gigabyte version. By the way, this is all coinciding with, I already reported on this, so I don't want to dwell on it here, but remember I did also report that the 3060 Ti is showing up with GDDR6X memory instead of its normal GDDR6. So it looks like Nvidia is throwing in a whole bunch of mixed stuff to its kind of like mid to upper mid-range RTX 3000 lineup. I wonder if this is just to use up parts better, cut costs, compete in some other way. I don't know, but it seems like there's a lot of different weird versions of these cards on their way in, so keep an eye out for that. Now, on the topic of GPUs showing up with, maybe different than their normal advertised specs, it's looking like Intel's Arc A770 limited edition. Some of them have been showing up with lower memory clocks, again being reported by video cards here. And it says that multiple users are now reporting that their 16 gigabyte limited edition cards are actually running at 16 gigabit per second memory, which is not the advertised 17.5 gigabit per second of memory. And it looks like this has been reported to Intel via GitHub. And anyway, interesting stuff. I don't know. Did you guys buy an Arc GPU? I bought my A750, but I've been so busy testing my 4090, I haven't had a chance to actually test it out yet. By the way, if you're listening, are you interested in the A750? Like, which GPU do you want the first head-to-head comparison with? I want to do a lot of them, but like, do we want to go up against its nearest price competitors from Nvidia, so like an RTX 3050? Or do you want to see it against like a performance competitor, which would be more like a 3060? Do you want to see it against an AMD GPU, something like a 6600 XT, something like that? I don't know. Curious what you guys think. Anyway, now I'm sure a bunch of you have been watching all sorts of videos showing off the burning up power connectors on the RTX 4090, and I've seen comments wanting my thoughts on this whole situation, and also I do have some updates for you that you may not have seen in some of the original videos on these topics. So basically this blew up on Reddit, where a user says they're just playing games, notice some smoke and fire, and their 12, I guess it's the 16-pin 12, whatever, I can't remember the name of this stupid connector, 12 VH power, connector, started like smoking, burning. It seems like the GPU still works, so it's the connectors here themselves that are kind of melting, so it's clearly some kind of a heat issue. And we saw BuildZoid talk about this, Jay's 2 Cents has done a video on this. And so, okay, so what's going on here? Well, number one, let me throw in some possibly new information. I think in the Jay's 2 Cents video, I heard, or at least, I haven't actually watched the full video, but I've seen people mention that he said something about maybe AMD would be using the same connector. So I could be wrong about Jay being the one who said that. But the point is, AMD, like Scott Herkelman here is, can speak for AMD on this, and says the Radeon RX 6000 series and upcoming RDNA 3 GPUs will not use this power connector. So right there, AMD is not using this. This is just an Nvidia issue, okay? Now, so what's going on here? It seems like if there is a big issue here, it has to do with the type of bending that is happening on this cord. They're saying, don't bend it horizontally. BuildZoid went into why he thinks a horizontal bend is especially bad. This is from Cable Mod. They're saying, according to their testing, it's best to get a nice straight line of 35 millimeters before it starts a bend. And, good luck doing that in your case, unless your case is absolutely massive, that kind of a thing. So what's going on here? So first of all, I do want to mention that one person's power connector burning up does not necessarily mean there is a widespread problem. However, there was a reply to that Reddit post with at least one other user reporting a similar issue. And what makes this look kind of bad is that Nvidia themselves had reported testing to PCI SIG showing, showing potential problems here, before these even came out, showing overheating of power connector at the mating point. Multiple suppliers' designs have failed. Cables with low cycles and without bend condition have not failed. So they're saying, without bend condition not failing, right? Failures observed on both rows of pins. Anyway, in hot spots, so basically bending for long periods of time can show hot spots. Now, what do I think about all of this? Well, okay, I mean, let's see what happens. For one thing, in this article from The Verge, they do say that they have reached out to Nvidia, or Nvidia says we are investigating the reports in a statement to The Verge. So we'll see what happens. They say that we are in contact with the first owner and we'll be reaching out to the other for additional information. So Nvidia is at least gonna, responding to this whole PR situation by trying to follow up with the people about this thing. Anyway, so what do I think is going on here? I mean, what seems to be the case, now, I'm going to be honest, guys, electricity does not make sense to me. A lot of math things, a lot of science things make sense to me, but the way electricity works baffles me. But what I think makes sense here is that if there's a bend in the connector, you get less contact, and if there's less contact, there's more resistance, and more resistance could make more heat happen at that connection point. That's how I would understand this, but like I said, I am not an electrical engineer, okay? And so with the bend, you could get extra heat there, and something like this happens when you have huge amounts of power going through this very tiny connector. It seems bad. However, like I said, products fail all the time, and that doesn't necessarily mean that if one or two of them fail, it's going to become a widespread problem. So I'm going to say, let's just keep an eye on this thing. I've got one of these. I'm going to try to make sure there's not some excessive bend happening on it. And we'll wait and see what sort of reports happen. If we see this is it and we don't see tons of these happening, then great. But if places like CableMod are saying, the bend's a big deal, it doesn't look great. And I am happy to see that AMD is not switching over to this kind of power connector. Because honestly, guys, I'm staring into my case right now. I don't have a picture for you. But I have my 4090 plugged in, and there's this mass of ugly cords going to this little connector. If the point of this connector is trying to make some kind of elegant solution, well, it's not really a very elegant solution, okay? It looks bad. Now, if you have the power supply that just runs one cord to it, I guess that is a more elegant looking solution or something. But most people don't have that, and it'll be a while before they do. Anyway, speaking of running huge amounts of power through these little tiny connectors, it looks like the colorful version of the RTX 4090, their iGame Neptune, has a max TGP up to 630 watts. So we are seeing one push past the 600 watt limit. So even though that cable's rated at 1600 watts, I think the card can also draw a little bit of power, through the PCIe connector, right? Through the PCIe bus. So this looks like it can be pushed up to 630 watts, which is a lot of watts, guys. Anyway, it's looking like, though, in this report, if I slide out of the way again, that it doesn't ship with 630 watts like out of the box. I think it's like 550 watts. And then it's looking like driving it up to that 630 watt power limit only scored 0.7% higher in 3D Mark Time Spy Extreme, according to this report. And yeah, the default was 550 watts. So it's already redlining at 550. And so that's really the thing here, is the diminishing returns on this anyway. And I kind of would have liked to have seen Nvidia just ship these at a lower power budget in the first place. I need to test this out, and I think I will in the future. How much performance do you actually lose dialing back the power on the 4090 pretty significantly? Because I have a feeling this could have been a lot more power efficient if they wanted it to be. Anyway, speaking of power efficiency, I'll mention that AMD, I'm seeing this through video cards, but AMD has claimed their RX 6700 is offering up to 33% better FPS per watt, so performance per watt, than an overclocked version of the 3060 Ti. Now, it's weird to compare it to an overclocked version, unless they just mean it's a factory overclocked version running at its stock specs, which could be what they're saying here. But they're releasing some slides showing this. Now, one reason why I'm interested in this is AMD highlighting their 6700 non-XT version, because this is still a GPU that's kind of flying under the radar. I don't have one. I haven't seen any major review outlet review these. So AMD did launch a 6700 non-XT, but it doesn't get a lot of press, except now they're highlighting its performance per watt edge against a 3060 Ti. But again, they put in parentheses OC, TBP 230 watt. So anyway, it's unclear exactly why they're comparing to an overclocked version when talking about power efficiency, so that seems a little bit weird. But anyway, speaking of power efficiency, AMD's Ryzen 7 7700 non-X CPU has been leaked, and we're now already seeing benchmarks against it. So this benchmark is being compared against a 7600X. So notice it's a 7700 8-core against the 7600 6-core. And this is in multi-threading, so hopefully the 8-core does beat the 6-core. So it seems like a weird comparison to make. But it is interesting to see the 7700 non-X being tested. Because the idea here is that, again, speaking of driving PC parts way past their efficiency curve, we're seeing that on CPUs as well as GPUs. So that's what we're seeing from all this competition, basically, is they're redlining their parts. So we could see a non-X version of these chips come out at a much more sensible power budget. The 7700X version is a 105 watt chip, whereas we're hearing reports that the 7700 non-X version should be a 65 watt part. And if it's able to get some decent scores, this is a Geekbench 5 score, then that would be pretty interesting. So if we see, video cards chart here showing the 7700, this score, and again, this is just Geekbench, so take it for what it is, but this is what we're seeing here. We're seeing its single core performance slightly below the rest of the lineup, which would be expected. If you downclock it, reduce its power limit, you run at a lower frequency and get a small penalty per core, right? But then the multi-core would still be beating this, the 6-core part, although this is, also again falling behind the other 8-core part because again, each core is running at a lower speed, so that's perfectly acceptable, And again, this is kind of showing why they wouldn't have done this on their actual part, because you want to look good against Intel, and all of that. So anyway, I would have liked to see the parts come out with a lower power budget and then just let you push it farther in some kind of easy one-click overclock mode or something like that. Anyway, speaking of CPUs, we're seeing Intel's Core i9-13900HK. This is a 14-core mobile CPU. Also seeing some leaked Geekbench scores. And let's see, the Video Cards article is once again highlighting this versus, I guess we had already seen a leak of this chip, but this new one is now scoring better. So that's interesting, and you can see it stacking up against the older 12th gen lineup here. So there are some improvements here, at least to the single core performance here, although multi-core seems a little bit more questionable if you look at the HK here versus the 12900 HK. But again, these are early leaks, and we'll need full reviews to see what the full performance actually looks like here. Now, AMD's Radeon RX 7000 RDNA 3 GPUs receive Vulkan 1.3.31 conformity, which is not surprising. As the new GPUs are about to launch, they do need to start supporting the latest versions of Vulkan and that kind of a thing, so I don't really want to dwell on this. Last couple of real quick things. Nvidia's CEO allegedly visits Taiwan and talks with TSMC to secure 3nm wafers, and talk to AIBs, help them out with their RTX 30 GPU inventory, and talk about the RTX 4080 12GB cancellation and how they can help out with that situation. This is being reported by WCCF Tech, but it's looking like their source is from My Drivers. So, interesting stuff. My video is getting long, so I'm just going to kind of move along here and leave you with, hey, some people I've been seeing with the high cost of computer parts, I've been seeing comments saying like, PC gaming's dead, everybody's going to move to consoles. Well, Steam breaks a new concurrent user record with 30 million concurrent users. However, it is important to note that that's just people logged into Steam concurrently. It's not people playing games concurrently, where it's looking like Only 8.5 million only of that 30 million were actually in some game at that time, because we have seen a record of 9.3 million playing a game concurrently, and that record was set on February 14th of 2022. I hope all of you have an excellent day.